In the grim dark of the 41st millennium, there is only
Space Marine painting tutorials.
So don't go anywhere, because you're about to see
another one.
So this is a coloured primer from Colourforge Republic Blue. We're going to be looking at using coloured primers or coloured sprays over a black base coat to achieve a nice smooth gradient. Airbrush users will likely tell you that if you're airbrushing miniatures, instantly makes getting base layers down so much more easy. And if you're going over a very dark colour with a light colour using a zenith, this will automatically create all kinds of shading and just save so much time. But if you don't have an airbrush, trying to achieve this with a normal brush can be quite a laborious exercise. You can see here that I've got the model tilted in such a way that the head is pointing directly in the direction that the spray is coming from. And this is going to ensure that the paint is only hitting the very topmost parts of the model whilst preserving the black, Chaos Black primer underneath in all of the recessed areas. Just give it a quick tilt here, you can see nice and black underneath, nice and blue from above. And we call this zenithal, the direction that the light is coming from. It's nothing new, it's something that a lot of airbrushers do to get a very simple shading effect on miniatures. But if you was to try and do this with a brush, it would take you a very long time. So if you don't have an airbrush, using a spray primer in this way is a fantastic method of getting just a very simple gradient on all of that blue armor very, very quickly. And this is going to form a starting point for what you want to do next. And you can either do just a handful of details and call it done as base ready, or you can take the model even further without having to do too much more to the blue areas. So here's one I did with yellow. In retrospect, this would have turned out much better if the colour underneath was a dark brown. I made a mistake by priming this one black. Would have looked great if it was brown underneath, but it's still quite a nice effect. This one I've gone with red. The volumes on this model are quite limited, and what I mean by that is if you look at the shape of the front of the model, it's not particularly dynamic, it's quite flat, and that doesn't lend itself particularly well to getting great zeniths, but it still looks pretty nice. With the majority of the armour now done, I'm looking to get the model battle ready. Games Workshop's definition of battle ready is 3 colours, and with Chaos Black and Republic Blue we only need to put one more colour on. But we're going to put a couple on, and to do that I'm going to look to use some pens, and here I've got some Sharpies. Now as you can see, the gold covers really nicely, it goes on really thick, covers up whatever's underneath very nicely, it's very opaque, and the same is true of the silver. But when we get to the bronze, as you can see, it's really quite watery and quite thin, and it doesn't cover very well. And if you try and then go over it, I find that the new layer tends to reactivate the layer underneath, and it just turns out to be a bit of a mess. So I would actually give the bronze one a swerve. The other problem I have with Sharpies, as you can see here, is the tips are very big, and being felt, they blunt off and go very, very easily. Now this can make it very difficult to try and get in recessed areas or do any kind of meaningful detail work. And for me, they're just not an optimum tool for getting metallic coloured paints onto a model. Up next are Molotovs. Now these are great pens, again, very well loved by artists. These are actually acrylic paint pens, and they cover beautifully. The issue again I have with these is they are felt tips, and at 2mm it's smaller than the Sharpie but still quite big, and as you can see, still struggling to get into those tiny areas. Not something that's great for precision work, but if you've got a larger model or a slightly flatter surface where you don't need to hit the recesses, Molotovs are really quite nice to work with. And now moving on to Posca pens. So these have just arrived and I'm quite excited by them. The nibs are tiny, they're 0.7 of a millimeter and they're quite hard, so I'm confident they're not going to blunt or go furry. And what this means is I should be able to get into all of the recessed areas and do a lot more detail painting with these than I would if I was trying to use the Sharpie or the Molotov. Here you can see I'm starting to paint the chest aquila, and the nib, as you can see, is so much smaller that it actually is a lot easier to get into those tighter areas and start getting the paint on. And we can also see immediately this is a really shiny, nice metallic colour, and it looks really nice. It wouldn't take you too long to do this with a paintbrush. I'm not expecting you're gonna, shave hours off your painting time, but that's literally taken me seconds, and it's completely covered. And I'm really happy with this. And then moving on, we're just going to hit the shoulders with it as well. Just going all the way around, trying not to get any on the blue armour, and trying to tuck into some of those harder to reach areas as best we can. For these ultramarines, I chose Republic Blue because this is a colour match for Macragge Blue. Now what that means is if I make any mistakes with any of the other colours, I can simply touch up with this Macragge Blue and that's going to blend in nicely. So here we've just got a situation where I've made a few mistakes with the Aquila, and I'm just going over, just touching that up, blending it back in, and you never know it happened. Now I'm going to paint the bolt gun with the silver Posca pen. Again, it covers really nicely, really small tips so I can get into all the small areas. And as you can see, it's going on really nicely. I would normally paint anything that's going to be silver black first. I find you get a better finish that way, but I'm just going for pure speed here. I would also would have chosen to have had a different colour on the slide of the gun, would have possibly gone with black or red. But I'm just going to leave it the same colour as his arm. I'm going to leave that blue just for speed's sake, because I just want to show you how quickly you can get this model battle ready. So with the Chaos Black and the Republic Blue and the gold and the silver, this now meets the requirements for battle ready. It's got a little bit of a gradient on there, so it's not just flat blue. It doesn't look like these easy to build blue plastic Space Marines. And with the blue armour and the metallics finished, it's time just now for some finishing touches. We're going to go in first with Mephiston Red on the eye lenses. This is just to add a little bit of visual interest to the face. If we were taking this paint job further, I might look to do a glowing eye effect, but we're just looking for battle ready here, so I'm going to leave it at just the Mephiston Red. And we're going to finish him off just by putting some Rhinox hide on this holster. And then he is ready to battle and die in the name of the Emperor. Nice battle ready Marine with some simple gradients on the armour. It's not going to win you a Golden Demon, you're not going to win a painting competition, but if you want to get an entire army of Space Marines painted fast, this method is going to allow you to do that. And now that Tony 2 Helmets is finished, we can see what the battle ready results look like. We can look and see what happens if we decide to use this base painting method as a platform to do a few more advanced steps and try and get a miniature that's a bit more tabletop standard and just a little bit nicer to look at. And the first part of that is going to be to go in with some Abaddon Black on the joints between the armor panels. Now we have got some of the Chaos Black showing through on the underside as part of our gradient, but there is some blue leaching into those areas. We're just going to tidy them up with Abaddon Black just to get some definition and separation between those armor plates. And then, as you can see, I'm also painting the bolt gun black, and it's also going to be the main color of the slide. I like black bolt guns with my Space Marines, and once that's on, I'm just going to mix a little bit of the Rakarth flesh with the Abaddon black to get a light grey colour, and I'll give the slide a quick edge highlight as well. Then next up, we're going to go in with some Rakarth flesh just to paint the base layer of the face, ready for some contrast paints, and we're also then going to use this on the purity seals. Now, Rakarth flesh is a Citadel base paint, so this is a bit more heavily pigmented than some of the lighter paints, so you don't need to put too many coats on. You just want to thin it down though and get a couple of coats on there for good coverage. Then after we've done that, we're going to come in with the contrast, and we're going to cover the face all over, and we're going to look to make sure that we're moving this contrast paint around so that it's not pooling too heavily in the recesses, but then also not sitting on the raised areas where we want the Rakarth flesh to show through a bit more. So there's going to be a bit of push and pull here as we move that around, getting it into the areas, just getting it to sit right. And if we do that, the contours of the face will actually do the work for us. And then it's just on to put a little bit of that contrast on the purity seals as well, just for a bit of shading. And then I'm also going to put some of that contrast paint all over the chest Aquila here. I haven't changed the gold colour since we put the Posca pens on, and this Dark Oath flesh is just going to really tone down the shininess and add a bit more definition to that area. And then we're going to go in with some Mournfang brown and just paint these pouches, just get a little bit more variation in colour on the model by getting these to look a bit more leathery. Now I'm using some lead belcher and using a method called overbrushing. So this is where we're using the flat part of the brush rather than the tip to go over and just catch the raised edges, and you'll see what this does is this just leaves black in the recesses to create some shading, and this does two things. It saves me having to go in and wash it again, and it just also just gives a really nice effect. It looks a bit more like a worn metal as far as I'm concerned, and for a quick and easy method, I like the effect that we get. And then to finish off, we're going to put some Calgar blue edge highlights on the raised surfaces on the armor. Now the whole point of this paint job is speed, so we are spending a little bit more time than the battle ready version that we did, but we still want this to be a very quick paint job. So that means I'm not going to be going over absolutely every single raised edge. I'm just going for the ones that are most prominent, that are the easiest to rub the edge of my brush along, and I'm just going to do that on the front and then repeat the same process on the back, pick out a couple of details on the arm, just so that when you look at the model there's a few areas that pop, and then we can get some nice variation without spending too long on the model. Our Space Marine is now finished, and as you can see it turned out rather nice. We didn't spend ages on this, it was only a few steps up from the battle ready version, but as you can see in a moment when we put them side by side, there is quite a big difference between the end results.
And there you go. I hope you found that useful. If you did or you didn't, whatever you do, please do not like or subscribe. It took me ages to make this video, and if I have even the slightest bit of success, I'm going to have to keep making them, and nobody wants that. Okay, so until next time.